Hi everyone, I'm Gertie and welcome to another month of the Charm Artist Collective here on Patreon. I'm so excited to be bringing you the Audrey Cigarette Pant, which is what I'm wearing today. Now you all have been asking me for a cigarette pant for years, so this has had a lot of time to stew in my brain, and I've been thinking about what would be the perfect cigarette pant for me. Now, I knew that comfort was going to be really important, pandemic style, right? So I wanted something that was a little bit like secret sweatpants, but also had a high-waisted, tailored look with pockets. So I believe I've designed what is a perfect melding of comfort and vintage style here, with the high waist, and this is a pull-on style, so no zipper. There's a 2-inch elastic band inside the waistband here, so it's very comfortable. We're using a stretch fabric, so these are velvet, these are ponte, so you have some choices. You can use your leftovers from Joan if you're like me and you ordered a ton of things for your stash to make Joan wiggle dresses with. So you can use similar fabrics as you used for the Joan wiggle dress. We also have a really nice looking tailored slant pocket here. And if you have sewn the Stanwyck skirt, the pencil skirt version, you know that I'm a big proponent of what's called a pocket stay. And I'm going to show you how to construct that today. It keeps your pockets nice and flat instead of gaping open. So we've made ours in power mesh too, which gives you just a little bit of control and firmness across the abdomen, which is nice, but you can make it in different fabrics too. We've also given you 2 different length and style choices. I am wearing the full ankle length pant, which is great in just a basic black. You'll wear it every day probably. And then we also wanted to do something a little bit special. I was flipping through one of my 50s Alden's catalogs and came across this Matador inspired pant, which I knew would be perfect for this project. So you also have your capri length with a sort of scalloped hem with a little bit of a slit, and we're showing you how to do a grommet lacing detail. And then we've also done trim around the pocket to really give it that Matador feel. So we'll be talking about that today. That's the version I'm going to sew on camera. So like I said, very simple construction. These come together really quickly. You will want to pay special attention to the part about the pocket stay if you haven't sewn one before. I can't wait to show you how it all comes together. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's talk about supplies and fabrics. So to start with, let's talk fabric. As I mentioned, we're using similar fabrics to what we used for the Joan wiggle dress. Something with around 50% stretch is perfect. So ponte is a great choice. Something like this ponte would be perfect. Rayon poly lycra blends. We also use stretch velvet and stretch velour for a lot of these pants, and it is very luxurious, let me tell you. But again, you're looking for that same amount of stretch. You could also, if you find some high stretch percentage wovens, like if stretch bengaline is available to you, techno stretch wool, even potentially scuba, the options are out there. I would say just make sure you're getting a similar amount of stretch, that 50% stretch percentage that you're looking for. Otherwise, you may just have to adjust the pattern, because if your fabric has more stretch, the pants are going to feel looser. If it has less stretch, they're going to be very tight. So you may need to adjust the sizing if you're using a different fabric. So just keep that in mind. Then you're also going to want something to make your pockets stay out of. We used this firm power mesh, which we had left over in the studio from the Esther swimsuit. So you could use something like that. You could use any sort of power mesh, light to heavy. Or if you don't want that kind of control on the abdomen, you could use something like a knit lining fabric. You just want to make sure it has some stretch to it. You don't want to use a woven for this. So something similar to your pant fabric. You could even use self fabric, honestly. If it doesn't get too bulky, you could use the same fabric if you're in a bit of a pinch for your pocket stay. You will also need a little bit of interfacing. This comes up in a few places. There's a little pattern piece to stabilize the pocket opening, that curved shape. So you'll need that for both versions. And then for the capri version, you will need interfacing for your hem facing. Okay, and then speaking of the capri version, you will need grommets if you want to do that lacing detail. And you can use the same size that we used in the waspy corset belt, which was size 00. These are a little bit bigger. This is 7.1 millimeters, so about a 1/4 inch in that opening right there. But honestly, it doesn't really matter what size you use as long as the cord you use can easily pass through it. And I just use a satin rat tail cord for our versions, but you could also do something like ribbon. An organza ribbon would be really pretty, or even just like a self-made cording, you know, that you make out of your own fabric would be cool too. So a lot of options with that. You are also going to need thread to match your fabric, and as always, I'm using all-purpose polyester thread. You will need 2-inch wide elastic for your waistband, and that width is a really important number because we've drafted the waistband specially to have just enough room to go around this width of elastic. So you'll need enough of this to go around your waist. And then if you like, you can do, especially in the capri version, it's really cute to find a trim that matches your cord and to do this around the pockets. So I found this fun Pacific trimming, this fun sort of circular trim. I love this sort of scalloped looking one. And also, because it's Valentine's month, why not a little heart trim? I got this on Etsy. So those are all your supplies. It's pretty minimal for this project. So next, let's talk about your pattern. Okay, so let's just take a moment to look at the pattern pieces. We've shrunk them down as usual so that we can look at them together and you can get the lay of the land, so to speak. So here is your pant front. You can see this is the crotch curve and then this is the pocket curve. This is the pocket stitching line. This probably won't be on the final pattern. We're still working from a draft here. But you will have this capri-length cutting line with that little curve there. So if you're making the capri-length version, you're going to be cutting right there. This is your crotch adjustment line, by the way. So if you need to remove or add length to your crotch line, you can use that one if you need more or less length in the crotch. Same on the back. Here is your back pant. You can see there's a little bit of shaping with a dart in the back, and then the back crotch curve. Again, crotch adjustment line and your capri cutting line, and then this is your ankle length cutting line down here. Now let's look at the waistband. The waistband is cut on the fold. You only need to cut one, and you don't need interfacing for the waistband because it's elastic. The elastic goes inside there. So you're going to cut one, and then it goes all the way around with a seam at center back. Let's look at the pocket pieces. You're going to have this little curved piece which you're cutting in your fusible interfacing, which just stabilizes the curved opening of the pocket right here. Because that can stretch out of shape really easily, we did want to stabilize that. So you'll be using just a little bit of fusible, lightweight fusible interfacing for that. And here is the pocket stay, which we were just talking about. Now this is cut on the fold out of your power mesh or whatever other, whatever different fabric you decide to use on this. But what happens is this is cut on the fold and you are going to apply it to the pocket curved opening, and then it'll get flipped in like this and extend across center front to hold the pockets really taut there without gaping. Then your pant side front goes behind like this to form the rest of your pant, to fill out that corner of the pant. And then we're going to be sewing in between the layers essentially to sew the side front pant to the pocket stay. There's no visible top stitching on this pant like there is on our Maryland jeans. So we're going to be sewing between the layers there to form the pocket bag. So it's really cool. It's not hard. It's just a few pieces that you might not be used to working with, and I will take you through every step of that. Then for your capri version, you're also going to have a hem facing. You're going to need to cut 2 of these in your fabric and then 2 in your lightweight fusible interfacing, and that is what finishes that lower edge with the really pretty curved scalloped shape right there. So that's all your pattern pieces. Okay, so we are ready to start sewing. We're going to start with applying those interfacing pieces to the pocket openings. So grab your fusible interfacing and you're going to put it on the wrong side of the pant fronts around the pocket curve. So it should just fit really nicely right there. Then I'm going to use a press cloth and fuse this onto the wrong side. Now, if you're wondering why we have this piece and if it's necessary, we think it is. Because if you don't have it, your pockets can start to gape open a little bit and stretch open. And for a really sleek looking, slim fit cigarette pant, you definitely don't want to see any gaping out of the pockets, right? So this is just going to ensure that your pockets don't stretch over time as you're using and wearing them. We made you really nice, big, deep pockets on this pant. So I think you're gonna love them. But we definitely want to keep them looking beautiful through the life of the pant. Okay, so there's one side. We'll do the next. Okay, and just make sure it's fully fused on there. That's looking good. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is to sew on the power mesh pocket stay. So place your pant fronts right side up now and grab your pocket stay. I cut mine out of that black power mesh I showed you in the supplies scene. So it looks like this. It's kind of a funny looking shape. And what you'll see is that it fits right around the pocket curve on each side. Now, if you sewed the Stanwyck pencil skirt, you may be feeling really good about sewing a pocket stay, but I will tell you that it's a little different on this pant because we have not sewn this center front piece yet. So what's a little bit weird is that we haven't sewn the crotch seam on the center front. So the 2 pant fronts are going to be 2 separate pieces, right? While we're applying the pocket stay, which is 1 piece. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to take you through every step, but it's a little bit different from other pocket stays that I've done before. Okay, so you're going to pin them right sides together around the pocket openings on both sides. And now we're going to go to the machine and stitch around the curved pocket opening. Now I am using a stretch needle in my machine because I'm using a Ponte, which, you know, you can often get skipped stitches if you don't use a stretch or ballpoint needle. So I did use a stretch needle, and we will be using some zigzag stitches throughout, like the pant inseam and outseam, we'll use a zigzag. On the pocket itself, I'm going to use a straight stitch because we really don't want this seam to be stretching. So we're going to use a straight stitch here. At 5/8 of an inch, about 2.5 long. And I'm using a contrast thread so you can really see it here. I'm going to do this on both sides. Ponte and Power Mesh are relatively easy to work with. I will say the Power Mesh is the slightly trickier fabric, so there are a couple things that you can do. You can always put the trickier fabric on the underside as you're sewing, and that will help stabilize it. So if you have one fabric that doesn't play as well with the other, put that one on the bottom, and it really helps the sewing. You can also kind of stabilize front and back if you're having a little bit of trouble. The trickiest ones I sewed were the velour with the power mesh. Those two did not want to work well together, so I just used those tricks and it did help. But I would say for your first pair, you might want to start with the Ponte because that's an easier fabric to sew for sure. Okay, we sewed both sides. Now we are going to grade those seam allowances. So again, the pocket stay is applied, but the center front crotch seam is not sewn yet. So first we're going to cut the power mesh or whatever you used for the pocket stay. That one's going to be the slightly shorter seam allowance. So mine's a little over 1/8 of an inch. And then the pant, a little bit taller than that. Do the other side, same thing. Okay, now if you've been sewing with me for a while, you probably know what our next step is going to be. This is an inner curve, which means we need to clip it. So a clip is just a snip about every 1/2 inch around that curve. Be careful not to cut through your stitching. And this will make sure that we don't have any rippling or bunching when we turn the pocket stay to the inside of the pant. Okay, so next step is understitching. Just like think of the pocket stay as a facing, right? So these are the steps you would do anytime you apply a facing that finishes an edge like this. We are going to orient the seam allowances so that they are underneath the pocket stay. And I'm going to open the pocket stay out from one side of the pant front. And I'm going to start stitching just right next to that seam line right there. Holding everything taut and making sure that my seam allowances stay underneath where I'm stitching rather than migrating over to underneath the pant side. Okay, same thing on the other side. Okay, and after understitching, the next step is always pressing. So let's turn the pocket stay to the wrong side of the pant, working from the wrong side here. I'm gonna get everything nice and flat and smooth here. And you're going to push out your understitching so that that seam line rolls out to the edge of the pocket. And we're going to press this here. Okay, so get it nice and flat and crisp like that. And now the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to take a little detour to talk about trims and how to apply them, because now is the time you'd want to do that. So I'm going to grab my trims and we'll come back and we'll just have a quick little chat about trims. Okay, so let's take a moment to talk about trim. So obviously if you're not doing trim on your pant, you can skip this, but I did just want to talk a little bit about how we applied our trim and why we chose to do it at this point in the construction. Now, I like to do it now because you can see what the finished pocket edge looks like, and you can start to think about how you want to place your trim in relationship to it. So you could just butt it right up against the pocket like this, but personally, I think it looks really nice if there's a little bit of space between the pocket edge and the trim itself. Or you can even go, a lot of the vintage pants I saw did some crazy stuff where it would go kind of down like this, and that gives you a more dramatic matador kind of vibe. So it's really up to you, and I can't wait to share some vintage inspiration on the Crowdcast with you guys this month so you can see some different approaches you can take to this. But on mine, I'm going to go about 1/2 inch from this edge. So I've gotten out a ruler, and I'm using this really fun scroll trim in black around the edge. So what you're going to do is place it and just pin it in place just to the pant itself, not to the pocket stay. So another thing you can do is if you could have done it before we even sewed on the stay, you could have applied your trim if you marked in your seam allowance and you were sure of where you wanted the trim to be. So keep that in mind too for your next pair. But you definitely can't do it after you've sewn the outseam unless your trim is easy to just trim off and finish by hand, because we want to catch the trim into the side seam. I love this scroll trim because it definitely has the look of a lot of the vintage pants I saw. Okay, so I'm going to trim off here at the edge, and now I'm going to thread a hand sewing needle and just stitch around the outer edges of the shape of the trim. So I've finished sewing this fabulous black trim to my pockets, and now we are ready to sew the side pockets to the pant fronts. Okay, so keep in mind that, again, I know I keep saying this, but I'm going to say it one more time, at least. The center front crotch seam is still open. It has not been sewn yet, right? So we have the pocket stay is attaching the two pieces, but the center front crotch seam is not sewn. Okay, so first thing you're going to do is put your two pant side front pieces out, right sides up, okay? And now we're going to place our front pant pocket stay unit on top of these, and we're going to match them together, and hopefully you can kind of see how this is going to form that sort of missing piece of the pant. Okay, so there are notches here to help you match things. This notch matches the finished edge of the pocket. So you can pin this here. And there is another notch to match this finished edge. And I would do one at a time. So now that you have those two pieces pinned in place, then I would just get the pant front out of the way and pin the two layers together underneath. So that is the pocket stay, which mine is in power mesh, and the lower edge of the pant side front. Because we're really just going to be stitching these two layers together to form the pocket bag. Okay, so now I'm going to flip the whole thing the other way so that you can see where we're going to be stitching. Now you want to make sure it lays flat when you're pinning everything together. Where we're going to be stitching is the pant side front, those two layers together, and then around this curved edge of this pant side front piece. So essentially stitching it down onto the pocket stay only, okay? We're not stitching through to the front of the pant. So none of this stitching is going to be visible when you wear the pant. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to stitch this. We're going to get the pant front out of the way and just stitch these two layers together at 5/8 of an inch. And a straight stitch is fine, again, for this one. I got a pin right under there. There we go. Okay, I'm going to pivot around here. Stitch that lower edge at 5/8 of an inch. And now here is where it gets just a little bit odd because we no longer have the throat plate here. So you're just kind of eyeballing 5/8 of an inch, stitching the pant side front down to the pocket stay. Just these two layers. So it's a good idea to kind of reach your hand under there and make sure you're not, you know, accidentally stitching any extra layers in there, either of these pant fronts. Okay, I'm going to back stitch there. So that's one pocket bag sewn, making that a functional pocket. And the next thing I'll be able to do is to baste the side together. See how the pocket bag is now sort of flopping around independently from the pant front. Now we can baste these layers together like this. All right, and you're going to leave it open at the waistline here until after we sew the center front crotch seam. Okay, so let's put the machine on a basting straight stitch, just a longer straight stitch. And I'm basting those layers together. Okay, so that's one side of the pocket completed. And I will just walk you through that other side because I know this is a little bit confusing, especially if you've never sewn this type of pocket stay before. So again, just the pant side front is right side up, and I'm going to put it underneath the pant. I'm going to match this upper notch to the finished edge of the pocket and just give myself a pin there as sort of a little placeholder. And then the other side of the finished edge, the side seam here, gets matched to that notch. And now it's easier if we flip the whole thing over. And remember, we're just stitching the pant side front, this pink piece here, down to the pocket stay. So we're matching these edges. This. Take your time with it, especially if this is something new to you. And then just sewing these two layers together on the side. All right, now for this side, I'm going to be starting the opposite edge from where I started on the opposite side. So you're going to kind of need to open out those pant fronts and stitch at 5/8 of an inch, starting at the waistline. And like I said, you kind of have to eyeball this, but it doesn't matter if you're even slightly off because it doesn't affect the fit. You're just creating the pocket bag here. If you wanted the pocket to be slightly deeper, you could even do a smaller seam allowance on the lower edge here. I'm going to pivot. Oops. Take out that little placeholder pin and just go as far as you can there. These layers will get, the side seam layers get more securely attached when we sew the side seam. Okay, so again, we want to, on the side seam, pin these layers together, the pocket bag, which we just sewed, and then the pant front. And now we're going to baste these together. Okay, so there we go. That's 2 pockets sewn. And the next thing we're going to do is move on to the pant backs and get them all prepped so that we can sew the pant legs. Okay, so we are ready to sew the darts in our pant backs. So just like always, you're gonna have your marked dart and you're gonna pin those legs together. And I'm going to sew these darts and press them towards center back. I'm just tying off that dart. And I'm going to use my ham to press these towards the crotch curve. Okay, same thing on the other side. Okay, so now that your darts are sewn, we can sew our pant legs. So sew each pant leg back to each pant leg front at the inseam and the outseam, so making them leg tubes essentially. Now, the only reason this is weird is, I'm sure you're gonna guess what I'm about to say, is because the pocket stay is connecting these two pieces and that center front crotch seam is still not sewn. So what you're going to do is just focus on each individual leg, even though you have the other leg kind of hanging off to the side here. Okay, so I'm going to put one leg right sides together like this. I'm going to start by pinning the outseam, matching those notches. From the waist down to the hem. And this is that side where we basted the pocket layers together. So you're just pinning everything together as one. Here's another notch to match. And now, because I'm doing the capri version, on the outseam only, I'm going to end my stitching at this lower notch here. Okay, so because I often forget stuff like this, I will give myself an X with my pins, just so by the time I get there, I don't just sort of mindlessly keep stitching. All right, and then I'm going to pin my inseam as well. And I'm going to sew these nice long seams. And for these, I'm going to use a narrow zigzag because we do want to optimize the stretch in our fabric throughout the legs of the pant, right? So I'm going to use a zigzag stitch like 1.5 millimeters wide by about 2.5 long. Okay, so I'm starting with my inseam. Okay, and then on the outseam, I'm starting at that double pin right there. Okay, so I've sewn one leg inseam and outseam, and now I'm going to press those seam allowances open. A sleeve board is really handy for this because you can put the leg on like a sleeve and press those seam allowances open. And here is where mine is open for the capri that's slit. So just press it open where it's sewn. And then I'll also sometimes put a ham on top of the sleeve board when I get to the hip curve. Now all of the pocket pieces go towards the front pant. I have some trim I can trim away there. Right there, that can go away. And all the way up to the waist. Okay, so I'm going to repeat all of that on my other pant leg. Okay, so I now have 2 legs sewn, and again, still connected by the pocket stay, and now we are finally going to sew the crotch seam. Okay, so I find it helpful to lay it with the fronts facing me, and then you're going to take these seam allowances and put them right sides together. And this is just a little weird because the pocket stay is right here, so you kind of have to go underneath the pocket stay to be able to sew those together. So just get the pocket stay out of the way, and then we are going to pin the entire crotch curve from the front waistline to the back waistline, matching the inseams. So make sure those seam allowances stay pressed open and you're matching that seam line. And the lovely thing is there's no zipper going in the center back or anything, so we're just sewing all the way from front to back. Okay, so here we go. Using that narrow zigzag again. And 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so we finally have something more closely resembling pants. And what you can do now is, if you are serging your seam allowances, you can go and serge the crotch seam allowance as 1 and trim it down to about 3/8 of an inch. I'm just going to go ahead and trim mine down and then press it open because I'm not serging. This fabric doesn't fray at all, so I'm not really worrying about serging with this pair. Okay, so you can either press these seam allowances open, like I said, or to one side if you searched. As far as you can around that extreme crotch curve. I'm just going to make sure to get my center front here, and then I'll do the rest off camera. It's a bit of a process to press that crotch seam open, but I do just want to show you the center front because now we're going to baste the upper layers of the pocket in place. So get your pants all turned right side out, and now see how the pant front is still loose from the pocket stay because we haven't basted those layers together yet. So that's what we're going to do now. So grab that center front seam, match it to your pocket stay, and then pin all the layers together, again matching the edge of the pocket to that notch. And now I'm just going to baste the layers in place. So this can be a straight stitch. Just a longer straight stitch. Within the seam allowance, so like 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to get rid of all these little threads, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come back and work on our waistbands. Okay, so now we are ready to work on our waistbands. So grab your waistband and your 2-inch elastic. So I'm going to take my waistband piece, and the first thing I'm going to do is fold it in half lengthwise, like this. And I'm going to press a crease into it. So I'm creasing that upper edge here. And now when I open it, I'll have a crease line to follow. So I'm going to grab my elastic and I'm going to lay a length of it the exact same length as the waistband, no smaller, no bigger. And we're going to align the edge of the elastic along with the crease on the waistband. And you can cut your elastic. And you can pin it in place there, but I find it a little bit easier to just place it as we're stitching it on, which is what we're going to do next. We're going to zigzag along this edge right here so that the waistband, or the elastic inside the waistband, doesn't twist while you're wearing the pant. Okay, so we're going to take this over to the machine and put your machine on a medium width zigzag. So mine is like 2.5 wide by 2.5 long. And I'm just going to stitch close to this upper edge here, upper edge of the elastic, like this. Okay, so now the elastic is attached to the waistband. And now the next thing we're going to do is sew this into a ring, like so. So put those notches together, and this is right sides together. And you can actually just catch the elastic in your stitching here at center back. So again, using a zigzag, I'm going to do a narrower zigzag this time, so about 1.5. We're going to sew this center back waistband seam. Go. And you can trim away the elastic from the seam allowances for sure, because it is on the bulky side. And now you can press that seam allowance open. And now we're going to fold the waistband in half lengthwise again, just like we did in the first step in this little chapter, so that it's fully enclosing the elastic. And now we're going to pin those lower edges together, matching the notches. And the next thing we'll do is baste these edges together at about 1/2 inch, the lower edge of the waistband. And I would definitely use a zigzag for this, so that, because we need a lot of stretch in this waistband. So zigzag, and you can do a longer stitch length since this is basting. And you can do it at like 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch. We're just trying to get these layers together. Okay, so now we have a completed waistband that we are going to sew to the pants. So grab your pants, and the center back seam on the waistband needs to match the center back seam on the pant. So we're putting everything right sides together. And just use your notches to match everything. So notch to match to the side seam. Okay, and for the darts, I would pin these in place to make sure that they stay pressed towards center back. And now we're going to stitch these together, again using a zigzag to make sure we have plenty of stretch, and a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you definitely don't want to be catching your elastic in your stitching here, but there should be plenty of wiggle room so that you're not, if you use the correct width of elastic, you should not be catching your elastic since it's secured at the upper edge here. Okay, so now that your waistband is fully constructed and basted together, we are going to apply it to the pant. So grab your pant, and now you're going to put your waistband right sides together with the pant. And I just messed this up and had to refilm it. So guys, be really careful that you should see the zigzag on top as you're putting these two layers together, because if you do it the wrong way, then your zigzag is going to be showing. All right, so be careful. And you are just going to match all your notches. So there's a notch on the waistband to match your side seams. And obviously your center backs will match each other. And make sure your darts are pinned towards center back the way you press them. Okay, so now we're going to stitch all the layers together using a zigzag. Narrow zigzag is fine. And your regular stitch length. And we're stitching at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so now when we flip the waistband up, this is what we should be seeing. No visible zigzagging. That should be on the inside and a nice smooth finish there. So just make sure you don't have any little catches or anything. And that looks great. So the waistband is finished. Just like I said on the crotch seam, if you're using serging on this garment, now would be a nice time to serge all of these seam allowances together. I'm going to trim mine down and then press them up towards the waistband. Now, if you are doing the ankle length pant, you're practically done, because the only thing you have to do now is hem the pant. So you're just going to turn up your hem 5/8 of an inch and then top stitch around using a narrow zigzag at 1/2 an inch. Give it a final press and then your pants are done. So congratulations to you. If you are doing the capri length, which I'm doing, then you still have to do your hem facing and your grommet finish. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, so we're now ready to sew our capri pant hem facing. So if you think back to when we sewed the pant leg, you should remember that we stitched it only to this notch right here. So what you have on each pant leg is an opening up to that point. Now we're going to grab our facing pieces, which look like this, and they are interfaced. Mine are covered with Elvira's fur. And we're going to put them right sides together into a ring. And these have a notch here which matches the notch where we stop stitching on the pant leg. So you're only going to stitch this piece down to the notch, okay? And then leave it open below. So I'm going to do that on both of these facing pieces. And I'm going to switch to using a straight stitch here. Just to the notch and then back stitch. Okay, so we're now going to clip to the stitching, through the notch all the way to the stitching, and then press that little seam allowance open. Same on this piece. Okay, and I would really recommend doing the same thing inside the pant leg as well. Just clip those seam allowances to the stitching like that. Okay, so let's start with this leg here, and you're going to take one facing and put it right sides together. And this is an interesting, we were just talking in the studio about how we've had this similar scenario in this pattern and the last pattern, and we're going to have it next month too. And we don't actually know the technical name for it, but we should come up with one where you have 2 points like this, which are going to meet like so, and you have to stitch. So you have basically 4 seam allowances meeting like this, and you have to stitch from underneath the seam allowances at the point all the way around, and then flip the seam allowances the other way so that you can stitch directly to that point, but getting the seam allowances out of the way. So we're working on some terms, what we might call this, but in the meantime, what you really need to do is just press those seam allowances open, put that match point together, and kind of do a little placeholder pin right there. And then we can start to match the rest of the leg together. And there's a notch for you to match to the out seam. And we're going to match around this curve here. Pin all the way around. Okay, so let's talk, next thing we're going to do is stitch this. We are going to start stitching underneath that seam allowance there. So you're going to get all those seam allowances out of the way, and then you're going to start stitching at that match point that you pinned. And start stitching as close as you can to the match point. And then back stitch. Release that thread there. Okay. And now we're going to keep stitching around the hem, going around that curve. camera's staring at me. Hey, crazy lady. Okay, now we're approaching that match point again, but from the other side. So now you're going to need to just kind of orient the seam allowances to the other way and stitch to that match point from the other side. And the goal here is to have as little of a gap as possible between where you started and where you stop, so that you don't have a hole where at the match point where everything meets. So let's see how I did. I'm going to turn this, if I just do a test here to turn this right side in, that looks pretty good. So the reason we do it this way rather than just keeping the seam allowances flat and stitching over them is because this gives you a more pleasing looking point and it doesn't get bunchy on the inside of that point right there, okay? So keep that in mind. The next thing we're going to do is grade our seam allowances. So the facings will be the shorter one. And then this one will be a little wider. And now you can do a few little notches onto that outer curve if you have a little room on the seam allowance. Be very careful that you don't stitch through there, or cut through to your stitching. Okay, and now we can turn this right side out. And now we're going to understitch the facing. So we're going to make sure all the seam allowances are going towards the facing itself, and we're going to stitch right next to the seam line right there. Okay, so after you've understitched, you can turn the whole facing to the inside of the pant and press that edge to get it nice and crisp here. So it looks nice and smooth from the right side. So at this point here, that match point, you want to make sure that your seam allowances stay pressed open. Then you're going to turn the facing to the inside of the pant. And I would put a pin here just to make sure that everything stays where it's supposed to. And then you can give this a really good press, okay? And then we are going to do some stitching in the ditch to hold everything where it needs to be. But first I'm going to press this here. Okay, so there's your little scallop sort of shape for the opening, and this is where the grommet lacing will go. I'm going to do a little stitching in the ditch right here to hold all these layers together. And then also, I'm going to do the same thing on the inseam. I'm going to stitch through the ditch to hold the facing in place there. And now you'll also, before you wear the pant, after you do the grommet, you'll also want to do a little hand stitching on the inside to attach this upper edge of the facing in place. All right, but first let's do a little stitch in the ditch right here, and obviously this will be a little better camouflaged if your thread matches your fabric well. Mine obviously doesn't. Okay, and same thing on the inseam that I just pinned. Okay, so there is our little slit shape, and if you don't want to do the grommets, you can obviously just leave this as is, but I'm going to do the lacing detail, so when we come back, I'll talk about how to set your grommets. so we are ready to do the grommet detail on the capri pant. So I just wanted you to see that I transferred the grommet marks to the pant itself. I just used one of these little disappearing ink pens. And if you bought the kind of grommet setter that I showed for the waspy corset belt, then you can go back and refer to that video if you need to, or just follow the instructions to set your grommets. But I have a fun new toy that I wanted to show you guys, which is this cam snap setter. I got it before we did the Patsy blouse because you can set snaps into shirts, into your Patsy blouses, but you can also set grommets with it, you can punch holes, you can set jeans buttons, you can set rivets. So we've been using it a lot for the Maryland jeans as well. So, you know, it's an investment, but I feel like we've used it so much already and it's so versatile that it's been really great to have. And I thought you guys might be interested to see how it works. So it's a big piece of equipment. It comes in pink, which, I mean, how perfect is that for charm? You have to get these different dies to go into it. So the dies are just the pieces that go in the top and bottom of the little clampy guy, right? So to do different things. So the first thing we're going to do is punch holes. And you need to use this die on the bottom. And the CamSnap website is really very useful, telling you what pieces you need to get to do what. So this is just going to be a kind of overview. I'm going to use the 4mm top die for a hole cutting. So this is essentially a hole puncher to set our grommets into. My grommet hole is 7.1 millimeters, but one thing I found through trial and error is that you need to make your hole smaller, significantly smaller, so a couple of millimeters smaller. This is 4 millimeters for a 7mm grommet. Okay, so just keep that in mind. This little die goes on the top and it needs to be screwed in like that. And then I'm going to take my pants and I am going to just center my mark underneath the die right here. And voila. Punch a little hole through the facing and the pant itself, like that. Okay, so I'm going to do that to all these marks. It's obviously very important to keep the facing layer and the outer pant layer very smooth on top of each other so they don't get wonky. Okay, so I've made these lovely little hole punches, and now I'm going to switch out my dies for the grommet setting die. So I'm going to take this out, and they come in these little baggies, which, trust me, it's very important to keep everything in the baggies so that you don't get super confused about what everything is. All right, this is the grommet setting die. And just like the other one, the base die just sets in there, and then there's one that screws in on top. Okay, and now you're going to take your grommets. So grommets have two sides to them, a front and a back, or a top and the bottom. So this is the side that is the front, and you're going to put that face down onto the base. And now you're going to grab one of these holes that you've punched, and you're putting your pant right side down onto the base there. And then I'm going to grab the other side of the grommet with the rounder side facing me. That is going to go on top here. And now I'm going to clamp the whole thing down. And I'm gonna stand up here so I can give myself a little bit more strength here, because you really need to use a bit of elbow grease. And now you can see this beautiful grommet is set. So how cool is that? It's a really cool machine, and I found it to be a really worthwhile investment already. So highly recommend it. And now I'm just gonna keep setting these 6 grommets. Oops. All right. Okay, so as you can see, these grommets look lovely, and we're just going to thread the cord through it now. So I just grabbed about that much, almost a yard of cord for each side, and then trimmed it where I wanted it after the bow was tied. Now what we're going to do is come up through the top holes. Down through the center holes. And then up through the lower holes. And now you can tie it off in a little bow. And like I said, you can use any sort of cord, lacing, or ribbon here, whatever you like the look of. And then tie it in a little bow. And then, yeah, you could obviously trim that closer, but I would recommend doing both legs and then tying the bows and then trimming them off evenly. But that's it. That's how you set those grommets for that really cool 50s lacing effect on the capri leg. Okay, everyone, there you have it. That is the Audrey Cigarette Pant. And of course, I didn't say this in the intro, but it is, of course, named for the iconic Audrey Hepburn. And I've been thinking of her since we came up with the theme for the Charm Artist Collective because of her beatnik scene in Funny Face. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. But she wears some amazing slim cut pants in that film. And I feel like she was kind of known for wearing that silhouette. So I feel like she would have very much approved of the Audrey Cigarette Pant, and I hope that you love it too. As you can see, it comes together so quickly, especially if you do the ankle length version and you don't do this fun lacing detail that we did on the capri pant. But there's so much you can do with it too. So I hope that you play around not just with doing, your classic black, but with playing around with colors and trims and different types of lacing. So I hope you've loved this project. And as I always say, thank you so much for your support. It really means the world to me. And also, we could not do this without you. So thank you so much for being patrons, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.